Welcome to the Cybersecurity and Cloud Podcast, the podcast where we learn from cybersecurity experts how to stay safe, private, and secure on the cloud and in code. CSCP is hosted by Francesco Cipollone, your cybersecurity friend with a passion for all things cyber and sharing stories of other professionals with you. This episode is brought to you by the generosity of Phoenix Security Limited. Phoenix helps startups and enterprises solve complex software security supply chain visibility by leveraging the power of correlation and contextualization. Discover how Phoenix Security helps CISO and security engineers act fast, prevent burnout, and implement DevSecOps at the speed of cloud. Phoenix Security. Correlate, contextualize, and act on risk with one click. Let's dive in.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cybersecurity Cloud Podcast. Today we're going to talk about something that we haven't talked about in the last 2 or 3 episodes, that is application security. And funny enough, we have hit a recurring subject in the last 3 podcasts, completely unplanned, that is threat modeling. So today I have Akira Brand, is a public speaker, super good friend. We've done on each side of the podcast show, a fellow podcaster. But without further ado, Akira, thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, sure. First off, thank you so much for having me. This is actually our first podcast together that you are hosting.
Yes.
So it's a milestone for me, which is great. My name is Akira Brand. I am an application security engineer. I am a cybersecurity consultant, and I am also a public speaker and podcaster with Application Security Weekly. I have been in the cybersecurity space for, I want to say about 4.5 years now in various roles. I actually started in developer relations, which is functionally a mix of education, coding, and a little bit of marketing, even though people don't like to admit it. It definitely is.
Or sales.
Or sales, a little bit of sales. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. And through that experience, I got really good at education and I got really good at public speaking. I decided, though, that I really wanted to get to the meat of things. And as such, I decided to become an application security engineer, as that was more or less the area I was focused on when I was doing DevRel. So I actually just wrapped up my time at a Series B startup called Resilia. And for what it's worth, if you're listening to this in February, I am looking for work as an application security engineer. So you can find me online at akirabrand.com. And I also consult with companies to help them functionally change their security culture and their development culture to one of communication, to one of collaboration, as opposed to animosity or even outright resentment. So that is a little bit about me. Gosh, what else? Oh, one thing I want to say, I am from a non-traditional background, which I think is really important for people to know. I spent 10 years as an opera singer. I sang all over the world. Francesco and I were discussing earlier all the commonalities we have in Italy together. And I also taught voice lessons that entire time as well. So I do have a huge experience being in front of people and a huge experience with breaking down really complex musical topics and now technical topics to audiences. And I'm extremely passionate about that.
Brilliant. And we can definitely double tap that and maybe an Italian intro for who doesn't know. I have or Italian origin, even though you can't hear it in my voice. You don't have the usual Italian accent. I tend to kill it. Exactly. I tend to kill it so much. Maybe I should bring it back on the show, like a little bit Italian in the show.
Of course.
Anyway. But what in your years in the industry, I mean, especially in the last 2-3 years, and in the show on the Application Security Weekly, have you seen the industry changing or evolving? What is your view on where we are right now with the application security industry?
I love this question because it is evolving so rapidly. I think what we're getting is a lot of clarity on what the role of application security engineers is. So when I was first starting out, application security engineers were not very clear on what the activities were, nor to me at least was it very clear on how one would execute a strategy for creating an AppSec program. So
Right.
to this effect, I started as an application security engineer, like I said, about a year and a half ago at Resilia. And I really needed to create my own program from the ground up without a lot of guidance.
Hmm.
And then what I've noticed is that people are starting to adapt frameworks to help them, which I think is great. Like this, we use the CIS controls, focusing specifically on CIS 16, the application security section. People are using NIST. There's a bunch of other frameworks too, like OWASP has fantastic frameworks for bootstrapping an AppSec program, maturing your AppSec program. But what I'm really seeing is that people are just experimenting and trying new things, and
Right.
we're starting to get a little more granular in how we approach this stuff.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I think we were chatting before, there is a little bit of difference on approaching an application security program holistically versus just the action of an application security program and focusing on the control. You can look at the way ASBS from OWASP to actually implement just a bunch of security control, the various areas, or OWASP some as a little bit of guidance and maturity calibration, but there isn't really how to build application security programs because it's such a wide and ever-changing field, I think. And that's why we're writing books a lot about it. I think I'm on the second
Yes.
books to write on how the heck is an application security program and what is even an application anyway.
Yes. What are we doing here?
Yeah, and you rightfully said, like 3-4 years ago, the role wasn't defined, and now even changing the role in product security person.
Yes, it's now it's product security apparently. I don't know what's going on.
So how would you start, first of all? Like, what are the cornerstone and milestone of one application security program, and how would you differentiate them from, the traditional controls?
Oh, I love this question. I'm actually going to relate it right now to threat modeling because that's our main kind of topic for the day. In threat modeling, as many of our listeners probably know by this point, since you've had a ton of podcasts on it, there is a 4-question framework that a gentleman named Adam Shostak created.
I
The
can smell a
first
show stack.
question, I know I smell a Shostak special. Um, the first question is, what are we working on? And Francesco, that is where I would start. I wouldn't start by just throwing a bunch of vulnerabilities at the software developers. I wouldn't start with even any other AppSec activities. I would start with discovering what are we working on? What are the pain points of the business? What are the pain points of the development team? We need to ask the engineers, what are we working on? We need to ask the leadership, like the CTOs or the VPs, what are we working on? We need to ask, of course, the security people, what are we working on? But we need all these different perspectives because I guarantee you they are all different answers,
Right.
and we need alignment before we can start building anything. One thing I took from Adam Shostak that I really like is that we would build whiteboards at Resilia, and we would also build mind maps at Resilia to answer the questions, what are we working on? A mistake I made when I was first starting out is I only asked the InfoSec team, and then I had
Right.
to do a lot of work to get the engineers alignment without just like telling them what I needed from them. I really should have gotten their buy-in first by asking them this question. So that's where I would start. I would actually start with the first of Adam Shostak's 4 questions. What are we working on here?
No, that's brilliant. And I think I like how you bring back the engineers because they're more likely to know what we are actually working on as a business rather than security.
Yes.
But it also
Yes.
tells you a little bit on we're falling on security to actually build a lot of the fundamentals from an engineering perspective, like asset management, understanding how the business is running. There should be really an engineering problem. But I like how you make that dual approach of like not trying to assume anything, but just go and ask the business.
AppSec programs, in my opinion, are fundamentally two types of issues. The first is an engineering issue because AppSec finds the issues, but we don't always remediate the issues, and we need to work so closely with engineering to make sure that all of our findings and all of our ideas and all of our activities are integrated with them, not them integrating with us. It must be engineer first. It has to be developer first. And that brings me to the second section of what I truly believe all AppSec problems are. I don't like saying that all problems are people problems because that makes people a problem, and people are not things to be solved. They're entities to be understood and loved. But if you can truly understand your software developers, their mindset, their workload, what motivates them, you're going to be in a much better spot.
No, I like the fact that people are not things to resolve, but problem are to resolve, and people help us accelerating that resolution.
We see people too much. This is a side tangent, but I think in business we see people too much as a problem, and you cannot, not a bad problem, but like you have to solve people, and you cannot solve people. It's not possible.
I like solving people, security, solving people, and failing at it.
How do I deal with all these people?
I know it's always been trying to solve the problem, and it's always been trying to blame well, the origin of AppSec, it was like blaming the dev of like doing bad code, and there are a lot of dev that do bad code, but not for their willingness, but because they don't know it, or that they don't have the right driver. And I like your approach of an application security program that understand the business, because then you can kind of flip the problem on the head and saying, look, this is the stuff that is important for you. This is what we need to secure. Let's get some buy-in. Let's get OKR and metrics that actually make sense for an engineers, because if it's not important for your boss, it's never going to be important for the engineers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually also a mistake that I made at Resilia, is that I didn't get the leadership on board as soon as I should have, right? So it wasn't until I was in about maybe month, well, whatever, it was just too late, to get the engineering managers on board. And then again, I had to do a lot of work to reverse that pattern again. And that's why I think it's just so important when you first go into a new AppSec job or you're revising your program, you have to get clear on what you're working on and get the buy-in and input of everyone involved, not just InfoSec.
No, I like that approach, because if you don't drive, actually, I will argue that that's the first point to do it, because if you don't have the buy-in, you're never going to get anything done, or you're going to fight against the tide or beg. And as you rightfully said, as application security, we have more salesmen and marketing than anything than security and engineers.
Yes, it's an influence job, right? Like it's all about influencing people to functionally do what you want them to do. And if you don't have trust, you cannot influence.
That's brilliant. And maybe a side tangent on that, because I want to bring also your background. How has your background helped or prevent you from doing your job, or kind of accelerate what how you interacted with people, and how did you bring that aspect into security? Because I'm really interested, because we need to encourage people from left field to come into engineering security instead of being prevented by it.
Yeah, so I think my background as a very long time educator really helped me. First off, I'm really good at teaching. Well, at least I have a lot to learn, but I'm okay, right? I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm really good. I'm like really good.
Come on, a little bit of the American badge of like, yes, come on.
Yes. Yeah, I've got this.
As British, we tend to just put ourselves down, be humble. It's nice to be a little
Yeah.
bit of American.
I am nothing if not from the USA. Regardless, when I was working in software engineering, I was always motivated by curiosity. I wanted to learn something new all the time. And if I could get knowledge from anyone in my company, they were now my new best friend. I would like kind of glom onto them and be like, what else can you teach me? What else can you teach me? Having had that experience, I know that a lot of software developers are motivated in a similar way that I was, and that is by curiosity. So I combined those two things. I've combined my skill in teaching and my knowledge that people are motivated, at least partially, by curiosity. And I gave a lot of trainings. I gave quarterly lunch and learns. I gave asynchronous trainings, and my engineers showed up. I had a very
Nice.
good portion of my engineers show up to the lunch and learns. And when we did async trainings, I had 100% of my engineers finish those bastards. Pardon my French. Finish those things. We'll edit that in post. Yeah. So, I mean, it's always good to get some training on how to teach people, especially on how to teach people technical topics. I am very good at teaching them face-to-face, one-on-one. I'm very good at teaching them voice-to-voice. I am still very much learning how to teach people via writing. So I have some background in technical writing, but I really want to get a lot better at that. And I also think that if you can create resources either through face-to-face or technically through writing, based on what engineers are working on at the time, they'll also be much more receptive.
This episode is brought to you by the generosity of Phoenix Security Limited. Phoenix helps startups and enterprises solve complex software security supply chain visibility by leveraging the power of correlation and contextualization. Phoenix platform connects to your repositories, scanners, and cloud, correlates all the information, and provides you with a prioritized list of vulnerabilities that need to be addressed first. Discover how Phoenix Security helps CISOs and developers remove friction and maximize the use of DevSecOps professionals at phoenix.security. Phoenix Security, correlate, contextualize, and act on risk with one click.
It's interesting. I'm reflecting because it's interesting. I'm an ex-trainer myself, and I found now the parallel that training face-to-face comes more natural, while teaching from writing is much more hard and challenging. I tend to do a lot of video, practical training and snippet and bite-sized things, but training through writing is a cathartic journey where you need to really think about who is reading, and you can't really tell who's going to be reading that article and how it's going to interpret it.
Yes. I love that you say cathartic, because when I write technically, I can get very stuck on like it has to be perfect, it has to be accurate, like it has to be clear. And what I've learned literally only in the past month is that I have to just open my notebook. I'm a notebook person, right? I use pen and paper. And I just have to write a bunch of garbage to start out with. And that actually gets an intellectual catharsis rolling. And then I can actually start to refine and get what I need to get on the paper. But God, I wish I had the word catharsis in my mind when I started technically writing about 2 or 3 years ago. So thank you for that. I'm gonna write that down. Okay.
The cathartic process of bonding with your technical knowledge, the technical writing.
Yes, that's what. Go ahead, sorry.
I find it getting into the flow. Like I really love writing books. I've wrote tons of books, and I find that state, I think, when kind of a state of a bliss when things start clicking in your head, and it does when you start writing it. And it's also like giving birth a little bit, because it's like you need to give birth to an idea, and it's really a gruesome process where to clarify, refine it, and there is beauty in the struggle, I think, of that process.
Yes. There is beauty in the struggle, and there is beauty in discovering your own process. And this kind of circles all the way back around to what we were originally talking about, threat modeling an AppSec program or threat modeling a security program. I love the process itself of the show stack 4 questions, because it gives us something repeatable to do that we can measure against, that we can also reflect on and find out if we're doing a good job. And I learned the importance of process back when I was an artist, actually, because singing is a process, studying music is a process. And when I came to tech, I was like, well, there's got to be processes for this stuff. Especially when I was learning software engineering, I was like, this is so overwhelming. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But now that I've come to understand a process, especially of how to build an AppSec program, or how to advise companies on how to review or refine their AppSec programs, if you don't have a process, man, you're sunk. Like, forget it.
And in that process, actually, I totally agree with you, by the way. In that process, do you find that we get stuck on the Shawshank method of like understanding what you're building and threat modeling it, or focusing on the actionability of those threat modeling findings, like getting something out of it? Because
Yes.
I find threat modeling like almost like a dark art where it's not really well understood, and everybody does it in a little bit of a different way. But
Mm-hmm.
if I found that if the findings are not actionable, then the value that you get out of the threat modeling kind of is like linked to itself, or it doesn't deliver
Yeah.
the outcome that you would like to do.
There's a term for that I will say. It's called navel gazing, which is when you're just like stuck on yourself or stuck in the process or stuck in the reflection. What I find that really helped me is documenting everything. And then using a like risk management framework to decide what risk am I going to accept, what risk am I going to maybe fix about like halfway, what risk am I just going to completely go all the way out and like absolutely have to deal with. And without documenting and without using some kind of a framework, nothing would get done. So I agree with you. Um, when I was first starting to learn threat modeling, I thought the documentation ended at DFDs, right? I was like, oh, we have a DFD, like we're good. We don't need any more documentation. Wow, was I wrong?
And for DFD,
I
for the folks that are not very familiar with threat modeling.
Oh yeah, for sure. So data flow diagram, or otherwise known as a DFD, is essentially when you model a system in software and you follow the data flows throughout the system and you discover weak points, right? It's kind of like a step 2 out of 4.
Mhm.
And it can be really, there's a siren song of like, I have this data flow diagram and now I know everything. But if you don't put your findings into some kind of framework like Stride or something like that, and then you don't decide what you're going to do about that risk, and then lastly, you have to put the work into a ticketing system for the devs, and you have to let the EMs know that you found these things, which is why that initial buy-in is so important. Nothing will get done.
Yes, because fundamentally, if it doesn't deliver into a ticketing system in the backlog in the queue, it's almost like you haven't done any work. You find the problem, but then if the problem remain in a stride or in a system or a piece of paper, then it's not going to be actionable. But on the other flip side, they need to be authorized to actually do that work or do those systematic change.
Yes.
Because if you find, for example, in your threat modeling exercise, a weakness in the authentication framework, it's a lot of work to actually re-platform an authentication
Yes.
frameworks or rewrite an
Yes.
RBAC model, an authentication system. So you need to get that buy-in.
You do. And you absolutely have to get it from leadership. You absolutely have to put it into terms that a developer will understand. And then, in my opinion, you need to bolster it with training on what they're working on, not just some random training. And something that you can also do that I found to be somewhat effective is you talk to the engineering managers and you ask them, if you have someone really interested in security, can you make doing security work part of their KPIs? And
Right.
as a result, help them get promoted, which is a big deal to a lot of people too.
I really love that, because then becomes a pattern that forms a pattern that the other people want to do, or they see a benefit on security, and as a bonus, as an added value, like as a rewarding system instead of a punishing system. So positive reinforcements on security that create that system where security is everybody's job and is not
Yeah.
actually just a lip service.
Yes. And sometimes I will say, Francesco, like to play devil's advocate to ourselves here, sometimes the stick in the world of carrot and stick, sometimes the stick is necessary if there's a huge issue and it needs to get fixed, and you need to articulate to engineering and engineering management of like, look, if this goes wrong, then we're going to have a huge problem. And then they might be like, oh, what's the problem? And then you discuss like, oh, well, it's going to be a DDoS risk or something like that. We had that at Resilia. And it was amazing how quickly people like responded. It wasn't DDoS, it was something else. But how quickly people responded when we realized that the business itself could be in danger. And no one wants that on their record. No one wants to be the person that had a security breach happen because they didn't understand what they had to do, or they just didn't do what they had to do.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I think you touched on an important point there that I want to double tap there. That is, fundamentally, we need to inform the business or anybody close to the business of the risk of specific things before they manifest. It's actually not on the security to take action or to decide those actions. It's for us to inform. And we've seen with the recent SEC move towards the CISO with the Sullivan case, that if you take on you as a CISO or as a security organization the role of deciding the risk, you actually making you a favor, because you're not informing the business or the market of the right risk, because it's not up to you to make those decisions.
Yeah, and there's a whole podcast I'm sure you could have in and of itself on like how to communicate risk to people who can make that decision. I'll just say one thing about it, and that is keep everything in writing. Everything in writing. Don't just like tell them or Slack them, like put it in an email chain so that everyone's on the same page. And also if something
maybe
does
in a risk
happen,
register.
because in a risk register is good too. But yeah, it can protect yourself too. And I know a lot of security people are really worried about that right now. Like, what if something does happen on my watch, but I said something to the CTO and they said, don't worry about it. Just get it in writing.
Yeah, I don't know if that encourage a positive behavior or a blame behavior. So we'll see the ripple effect of those decisions. I think it definitely makes security more of a live or die situation, where you could potentially have a huge impact on your career or in general, even personal liability. So we'll see what the role of the CISO and all this ripple effect will lead. But I wanna bring in the dirty word back on the threat modeling. That is,
sure.
Do you think AI is gonna help threat modeling, or help kind of scaling and advancing threat modeling, or is that just a phase?
I think it will. A teenage phase of threat modeling. It's just figuring it out. It's a phase, mom. The goth now. I think it will, but I don't think we know how yet. I think it's too early in its infancy stages to see the outcome. I think it might help with the process, but the process has that last notch that we just discovered and discussed together, which is how do you take all these findings and turn them into action? I haven't seen AI help anybody turn findings into action yet. I'm not saying it won't happen, but I just don't think it exists yet.
Right. We'll leave it at that on the AI, because that's, I think, another podcast in itself.
We'll have the AI
threat modeling
carnival.
AI.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's a whole thing, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot of movement around, and I'm really excited about this. But talking about excitement, we're coming towards the close of the show, and we have a tradition here, Akira, that is leaving everybody with a warm and fuzzy feeling, because cybersecurity is
Mhm.
heavy enough. So I like to leave my audience with a nice and warm feeling. So what would be your positive message on this whole conversation and in general on the state of the industry?
So, not to sound too woo-woo, but I think this entire industry is based on relationships. And as long as, again, you can remember that people are not a problem, but they are entities to be understood and seen and encouraged, then I think that we're going to do fine as an industry. And I do see that happening, which is encouraging to me.
Brilliant. I love that positive message about people are not there to be fixed, but are there to collaborate and network with. And definitely the
Yes.
podcast. And the podcast actually has brought us together as a community, as two community of podcasts coming together. So I love it. So that's
Yes.
brilliant. Thank you so much, Akira, for coming on the show. One last thing, if somebody want to hear more about you, what you write, where you appear, can you tell us a little bit where they can find you?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on my website, www.akirabrand.com. It's just my name. If you want to reach out to me directly, just find me on LinkedIn. I'm Akira B. You'll see my headshot, and you can message me there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And everybody listening to the show, go out there and try to do threat modeling on your application security program, or practice your threat modeling and make sure that the business is involved, you risk assess, your CIA cover your something. I'll let you figure out your A with email and with risk assessment and with ticketing system. But it's been a brilliant conversation with Akira Brand. I thank you so much for coming on the show, and everybody else, stay safe out there. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcast and post it on social media tagging Cybersecurity Cloud Podcast for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. Discover other episodes at www.cybersecuritypodcast.com.